My phone buzzed during lunch break. The daycare number flashed on screen, and my heart sank. Both my kids had fevers and needed to be picked up immediately. I took a deep breath and walked to Doug's office, knowing he'd be annoyed. "I need to leave early today. My kids are sick at daycare," I said quietly. Doug looked up from his computer, his face twisting with disgust. "Are you fucking kidding me?" he barked loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is the third time this month." "I know, but they have fevers and—" "Just fucking go," he spat, waving his hand dismissively. Then he leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You keep getting more and more worthless around here." The words hit me like a slap. I felt my cheeks burn as I noticed James, the general contractor, and another supervisor standing nearby. They'd heard everything. James raised an eyebrow at Doug, looking uncomfortable. I grabbed my things without saying another word. My hands shook as I walked past my coworkers, feeling their eyes on me. Some looked away awkwardly. Others pretended they hadn't heard anything. The silence was deafening as I made my way to the parking lot, my face burning with shame and anger. But I had heard it, and apparently, so had James. That moment would change everything. I remembered my first day like it was yesterday. I'd been so nervous, clutching my hard hat and safety vest, excited to finally break into construction. The pay was good, and I desperately needed stable work to support my 2 kids after my divorce. Doug had seemed friendly enough during the interview. "Don't worry about being green," he'd assured me with a smile. "We'll train you up, right? Everyone starts somewhere." But training never came. Instead, Doug would disappear for hours, leaving me to figure things out on my own. When I asked other workers for help, they'd shrug and say, "Ask your supervisor." But Doug was never around. The few times I managed to corner him, he'd act annoyed. "You should be picking this stuff up by watching," he'd say. That's how everyone else learned. I spent those first weeks feeling completely lost. I'd watch other crews work, trying to absorb what I could. Sarah, a seasoned worker on another team, would sometimes throw me a bone and explain basic procedures. But she wasn't my supervisor. "Doug's supposed to be training you, right?" she'd asked one day, looking concerned. I just nodded, too embarrassed to admit I felt abandoned. I'd go home exhausted, not from physical work, but from the constant stress of being unprepared and unsupported. The daily comments started small. "Still lost?" Doug would ask when he'd finally show up on site. "You sure this trade's for you?" Other workers would hear and laugh awkwardly. Some joined in with their own jokes about the rookie. But I noticed Mateo, a quiet guy on my crew, would look uncomfortable when it happened. "Maybe try a different career," Doug suggested one day when I asked about proper safety procedures. "This might be too complicated for someone like you." Someone like me. A single mom trying to make ends meet. I bit my tongue and kept working. I had 2 kids to feed and rent to pay. I couldn't afford to lose this job, no matter how much Doug chipped away at my confidence. The worst was when clients were around. Doug would introduce me as our trainee, even after I'd been there for months. He'd make jokes about my inexperience, undermining me in front of people I was supposed to be serving. "Don't mind her," he'd say with a chuckle. "She's still learning the ropes." One afternoon, I overheard him talking to another supervisor. "She's my charity case," he laughed. "Company's diversity hire, you know?" The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I felt my confidence crumbling day by day, wondering if maybe he was right about me. 3 months in, I finally had a breakthrough. A client had an electrical issue that was holding up the whole project. While Doug was off somewhere, I remembered something Sarah had taught me and managed to fix it myself. The client was impressed. "Nice work," he said, shaking my hand. Quick thinking. When Doug returned, he immediately took credit. "Yeah, I walked her through that repair," he told the client. "Good thing I was here to guide her." But later, as we were packing up, Mateo approached me quietly. "You handled that really well," he said, his voice low so Doug wouldn't hear. "That was all you." It was the first time anyone had acknowledged my actual skills. A small crack in the wall of doubt Doug had built around me. "Thanks," I whispered back, feeling a tiny spark of hope. But Doug must have noticed our conversation because he shot Mateo a sharp look. Mateo immediately looked away and busied himself with his tools. The message was clear. Don't encourage her. Still, that moment of recognition meant everything. Maybe I wasn't as hopeless as Doug made me believe. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of my old confidence returning. I realized I actually understood more than I gave myself credit for. After Doug called me worthless, I sat in my car outside the daycare, shaking. The kids were already better by the time I got there, just a minor bug that broke quickly. But I couldn't stop crying. It wasn't just the insult, it was the way he'd said it in front of everyone. The casual cruelty. The assumption that I was disposable. Worse, part of me was starting to believe him. Maybe I was worthless. Maybe I didn't belong in construction. Maybe I should just quit and find something easier. My 3-year-old daughter looked at me in the rearview mirror as I buckled her into her car seat. "Mommy sad?" she asked, reaching out to touch my face. That broke me completely. Here I was, falling apart because some man thought he could treat me like garbage. But my kids needed me to be stronger than that. That night, after putting them to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and made a decision. This couldn't continue. I wouldn't let Doug's toxicity poison my life anymore. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but something had to change. The humiliation ended now. I thought about my kids sleeping peacefully upstairs, trusting me to provide for them and protect them. They deserved a mother who fought back, not one who accepted abuse. The next morning, James, the general contractor who'd witnessed Doug's outburst, approached me at the job site. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. I shrugged, not wanting to make waves. "I'm fine. I've worked with a lot of people over the years," James said, looking around to make sure no one was listening. What happened yesterday wasn't right. Something in his tone made me look up. "You've seen this before?" "I used to work under Doug myself, about 5 years ago," James admitted. "He hasn't changed, still the same bully." The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Doug had been doing this for years, to other people. This wasn't about me being inadequate. This was about him being a predator who targeted anyone he perceived as vulnerable. "Why doesn't anyone do anything about it?" I asked. James sighed. "Politics. Doug's got friends upstairs. People look the other way. So I'm just supposed to take it?" "I didn't say that," James replied carefully. "Just saying you're not the first person to deal with his crap." As he walked away, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't alone in this. James had survived Doug and moved on to bigger things. Maybe there was hope for me too. The conversation planted a seed of possibility in my mind. That evening, I started a journal. Not for therapy, for evidence. I wrote down every incident I could remember. The missed training sessions, the public humiliation, the inappropriate comments, the times Doug had disappeared when he was supposed to be supervising. I noted dates, times, witnesses. I documented his pattern of behavior methodically, like I was building a case. Because maybe I was. One entry caught my attention as I wrote, "Doug scheduled for 8-hour shift, left after 3 hours. No explanation to crew. Mateo had to call James to get approval for overtime." Another, "Doug told client I was diversity hire in front of entire crew. Date March 15th. Witnesses, Mateo, Sarah, Mike." The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. Doug wasn't just a bad boss, he was negligent. He wasn't doing his job, and he was covering for his own inadequacies by tearing down others. I kept detailed notes about his absences, his failures to follow safety protocols, his unprofessional conduct with clients. If I was going down, I wasn't going down alone. My journal became my lifeline. Every day, I'd add new entries, building a comprehensive record of Doug's misconduct. The act of writing gave me back some control over my situation. I was no longer just a victim. I was an investigator. Over the next few weeks, something interesting happened. Other workers started opening up to me. Maybe they sensed I was documenting things, or maybe Doug's behavior was getting worse across the board. "Doug was gunning for me last year," whispered Tom, a veteran electrician. "I had to transfer to another crew just to get away from him." "He's done this before?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Oh yeah, there's a whole trail of people who've quit because of him," Tom said. "But he's got protection upstairs. His golf buddy in management always covers for him." Sarah confirmed it. "I've seen at least 6 good workers leave because of Doug. All of them were people he thought he could push around." The pattern was clear. Doug targeted women, minorities, anyone he perceived as having less power. And management turned a blind eye because he was buddies with someone important. Why doesn't anyone report him? I asked. People have tried, Sarah said grimly. Nothing ever happens. If anything, it gets worse for whoever complains. But I was already planning my next move. Doug might have gotten away with this pattern for years, but I wasn't going to be another silent victim. I was building something bigger than just my own case. I was uncovering a systemic problem. I scheduled a meeting with HR. Linda, the HR representative, listened politely as I outlined my concerns. I kept it professional, focusing on Doug's failure to provide proper training and supervision. I see, she said, taking notes. These are serious allegations. We'll definitely follow up on this. When can I expect to hear back? I asked. We'll need to investigate thoroughly. Give us a few weeks. I left feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe the system would work. Maybe Doug would finally face consequences for his behavior. But weeks passed with no word from HR. Doug continued his pattern of harassment, seemingly oblivious to my complaint. If anything, he got meaner. Heard you had a little chat with HR, he said one day, cornering me in the supply room. That was a mistake. My blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't, he sneered. Let me make something clear. You try to come for me again, and I'll bury you. You think your little complaints matter? I've got friends in this company. You're nobody. He was right about one thing. I was nobody, but sometimes nobody has nothing to lose. His threat only confirmed what I already suspected. The system was rigged in his favor. I needed a different strategy. Doug's retaliation was swift and vicious. My tools started disappearing. I'd be assigned the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs. He'd pair me with the most hostile workers, guys who'd make my life hell just for fun. Can't find your hammer? Doug would ask with fake concern. Maybe you left it at home, along with your brain. I'd have to spend my own money replacing tools that mysteriously vanished. I'd work twice as hard to complete tasks that should have been simple, hampered by equipment that didn't work, or teammates who actively sabotaged me. The psychological warfare was exhausting. I'd go home every night feeling beaten down, questioning my sanity. Was I imagining things? Was this normal construction site behavior? But I kept documenting everything. Every missing tool, every impossible assignment, every cruel comment. My journal grew thicker by the day. One afternoon, I found myself crying in a stairwell during lunch break. I thought I was alone, but Matteo appeared at the top of the stairs. This has to stop, he said quietly. I think it's time we all say something. We? You're not the only one who's fed up with Doug's crap, Matteo said. There are others. People who've been watching this happen and feeling sick about it. His words gave me hope that I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Matteo was true to his word. Within a week, 4 formal complaints had been filed against Doug. Matteo, James, Sarah, and Mike all submitted detailed accounts of Doug's harassment and misconduct. HR couldn't ignore multiple complaints from respected workers. Doug was temporarily reassigned while they conducted their investigation. For 2 glorious weeks, I worked under a different foreman. Dave was patient, professional, and actually trained me properly. For the first time, I felt like I belonged on the construction site. You're picking this up fast, Dave said as I successfully completed a complex wiring job. Doug really did you a disservice by not training you right from the start. I thrived under real supervision. My confidence grew. I started contributing ideas to the team. Other workers began treating me with respect, but it was too good to last. Investigation concluded. HR announced insufficient documentation to substantiate the complaints. Doug was coming back, and he was going to be furious. I'd learned something important during those 2 weeks, though. I wasn't the problem. Doug was, and now I knew exactly what I was capable of when I wasn't being constantly undermined. Doug strutted back onto the job site like a conquering hero. Miss me? He asked with a smirk. I didn't react. I just smiled and kept working. Ah, did you think your little complaint was going to stick? He taunted. I told you I had friends upstairs, but I'd already made my decision during his absence. I wasn't going to waste any more energy fighting a rigged system. I was going to find a way out. That evening, I updated my resume and started searching job boards. I applied to 3 different construction companies, emphasizing the skills I developed despite Doug's sabotage. You know what your problem is? Doug said the next day. You think you're better than this place, but you're not. You're nothing special. I nodded along, pretending to be defeated. You're probably right. But inside, I was calculating. I had interviews lined up. I had documentation of Doug's misconduct, and I had allies who'd witnessed everything. Doug thought he'd won. He had no idea I was already planning my exit strategy. The interview at Apex Construction was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I walked into their office wearing my best professional outfit, hoping I looked more confident than I felt. The hiring manager, Robert Chen, reviewed my resume with interest. Then he looked up with a frown. Wait, you currently work under Doug Patterson? My heart sank. Yes, do you know him? Robert's expression darkened. I was Doug's supervisor for 3 years before I left for this company. If you can survive working under Doug, you're already 10 steps ahead of most candidates. I couldn't believe it. You know about his management style? Doug is a bully and a coward, Robert said bluntly. He picks on people he thinks can't fight back. The fact that you've lasted this long tells me everything I need to know about your character. The conversation shifted completely. Instead of defending myself, I found myself being curted. Robert wanted to know about my experience, my skills, my goals. Doug probably told you that you're not cut out for construction, Robert said. Doug says that to everyone who threatens his ego. Trust me, you're better off without him. 2 days later, Robert called with an offer. Better pay, better benefits, and a supervisor who actually wanted to help me succeed. I gave my 2 weeks' notice the next morning. Doug laughed when I handed him the letter. Apex Construction? Good luck with that. They'll fire you within 6 months. Maybe, I said calmly, but I'm willing to take that chance. You know what? I'm going to do you a favor, Doug said with a cruel smile. I'm going to call Robert and tell him exactly what kind of worker you are. Save him the trouble of finding out himself. That's your choice, I replied. Doug was clearly expecting me to beg him not to sabotage me. When I didn't react, his smile faded. You think you're hot shit now? He snapped. You'll be crawling back here within a year. We'll see, I said and walked away. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Doug made sure my final days were as miserable as possible, but I endured it all with a smile, knowing I had an escape route. My last day finally arrived. As I packed up my tools, several coworkers came by to say goodbye. You made it out, Mateo said, shaking my hand. Respect. James clapped me on the back. Good luck at Apex, Robert's a good guy. Even Sarah, who usually kept her head down, wished me well. You inspired some of us, she said quietly. Maybe we'll find the courage to leave too. Doug was nowhere to be seen during my goodbye rounds. I heard he'd taken the day off, probably to avoid the awkwardness of watching me leave triumphantly. As I walked to my car for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of Doug's constant negativity was finally lifting off my shoulders. I had no idea what challenges awaited me at Apex, but I knew they couldn't be worse than what I was leaving behind. My phone buzzed with a text from my babysitter. How did your last day go? I smiled as I typed back, like a weight lifted off my shoulders. My first day at Apex was everything I'd hoped for. Robert introduced me to the team, showed me around the facility, and outlined my training schedule. By the way, he said casually, Doug called me yesterday. My stomach dropped. What did he say? Robert laughed. He told me not to hire you, said you were unreliable and couldn't handle the work. Which only confirmed that I made the right choice. Really? Doug's reputation precedes him in this industry. When he tells me not to hire someone, I take it as a strong recommendation to hire them immediately. I couldn't believe it. Doug's attempt to sabotage me had actually backfired. Don't worry, Robert continued. We're keeping receipts on everything Doug said. If he tries to cause you any problems, we'll handle it. Over the next few days, I learned that Doug's toxicity was well known throughout the local construction community. Other supervisors would roll their eyes when his name came up. Contractors would warn each other about working with him. He's burning bridges left and right, my new teammate Carlos explained. Word is he's lost 2 more crew members since you left. Under Robert's mentorship, I flourished. He actually trained me properly, explained the reasoning behind different procedures, and gave me increasingly complex assignments as my skills developed. You're a natural at this, he said after I successfully completed a challenging electrical installation. Whoever told you otherwise was lying. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in construction. My confidence grew daily. I started contributing ideas during team meetings. I took on leadership roles for smaller projects. Clients began complimenting my work directly. "She really knows her stuff," one contractor told Robert. "Mind if we request her for future jobs?" The contrast with my experience under Doug was stark. Same skills, same work ethic, completely different results. The only variable was the quality of supervision and support. "I wish I'd found you sooner," Robert said one day. "You've been wasted potential for too long." I thought about all the months I'd spent doubting myself, wondering if I was cut out for this work. Doug had nearly convinced me to quit the industry entirely. Thank God I'd trusted my instincts instead. 3 months into my new job, I got unexpected news. James, the general contractor from my old site, had recommended me to lead a major project for Morrison Industries, one of Doug's key clients. "They specifically asked for you," Robert explained. "James told them you were the most competent worker he'd dealt with in years." The project was a big deal. A complete electrical overhaul of Morrison's main facility. It would take months and was worth serious money to whichever company landed it. On my first day at the Morrison site, I spotted a familiar figure across the parking lot. Doug was there with a small crew, working on a much smaller project. When he saw me, his face went pale. I walked over with my clipboard and hard hat, every inch the professional he'd claimed I could never be. "Hello, Doug," I said politely. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. "What are you doing here?" "Leading the Morrison electrical project," I replied. "Good to see you again." The look of shock and rage on his face was priceless. Over the next few weeks, I heard through the grapevine that Doug was struggling. He'd lost 3 more workers, and his remaining crew was demoralized. Projects were running behind schedule. Clients were complaining. "Word is he's under serious scrutiny from management," Carlos told me. "Apparently they're getting tired of the complaints." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Doug had been focused on tearing me down, he'd neglected his actual responsibilities. His crew was dysfunctional, his projects were failing, and his reputation was in tatters. Meanwhile, I was thriving. The Morrison project was ahead of schedule and under budget. The client was so impressed, they were already talking about additional contracts. "You've exceeded every expectation," the Morrison project manager told me. "We'll definitely be requesting you for future work." I learned that HR at my old company had reopened their investigation into Doug. Multiple former employees had come forward with additional complaints. The pattern of misconduct was becoming impossible to ignore. "They're finally taking it seriously," James told me over coffee. "Your documentation helped a lot. Thanks for sharing it with them." HR contacted me directly to request a formal statement about my experiences with Doug. They wanted detailed documentation of his misconduct and its impact on my work performance. I spent an evening crafting a comprehensive report. I included specific dates, times, witnesses, and examples of Doug's harassment. I documented his failure to provide proper training, his public humiliation tactics, and his retaliatory behavior after I complained. The report was calm, professional, and devastating. I focused on facts rather than emotions, letting Doug's actions speak for themselves. "This is exactly what we needed," the HR investigator told me. "Your documentation is more thorough than anything we've seen before." I felt a sense of closure as I submitted the report. I wasn't seeking revenge, I was seeking justice. Not just for myself, but for all the other workers Doug had bullied over the years. "Thank you for having the courage to speak up," the investigator said. "This will help ensure other people don't have to go through what you experienced." A week later, I received a brief email. "Thank you for your statement. It provided valuable insight into the situation. That's more than enough to move forward." The construction industry is surprisingly small, and word travels fast. Within days, everyone knew that Doug was under formal investigation. His reputation, already damaged, began to crumble completely. "He's toxic," contractors would whisper at industry meetings. "Nobody wants to work with him anymore." His golf buddy in upper management, the one who'd protected him for years, suddenly retired. Without that shield, Doug was exposed to the full weight of accumulated complaints. "It's like a dam burst," Sarah told me when we ran into each other at a supply store. "Everyone's finally talking about what he did to them." The investigation revealed a pattern of misconduct spanning years. Doug had driven away dozens of talented workers through his bullying tactics. The company had lost money, contracts, and reputation because of his behavior. "They're keeping him on probation while they figure out what to do," Sarah explained. "But everyone knows he's done." I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that justice was finally being served. Sadness that it had taken so long and affected so many people. The news came through James. Doug had been demoted and transferred to a dead-end administrative role. No more field work, no more supervising, no more opportunities to abuse his authority. "He's basically filing paperwork in a basement office," James told me with a grin. "Word is they're hoping he'll just resign rather than face the humiliation." Doug's fall from grace was swift and complete. The man who'd once strutted around construction sites like a king was now a pariah, relegated to meaningless busywork. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected LinkedIn message from Doug himself. "Hey, I heard you're doing well at Apex. Any chance you could put in a good word for me? I'm looking for new opportunities." I stared at the message in disbelief. After everything he'd put me through, he had the audacity to ask for help? I considered several responses. I could tear into him, listing every cruel thing he'd ever said to me. I could explain how his behavior had nearly destroyed my confidence and career. Instead, I simply didn't respond. Doug wasn't worth my time or energy anymore. Rather than engaging with Doug's plea for help, I focused on my own success. I posted a photo of my new safety certification on LinkedIn with the caption, "When you're finally trained right, it shows." I didn't mention Doug by name, but anyone who knew our history would understand the subtle reference. The post went viral within construction industry circles. Dozens of workers shared their own stories about overcoming toxic supervisors. My inbox filled with messages from people who'd faced similar situations. "Your story gave me the courage to leave my horrible boss," one woman wrote. "Thank you for showing it's possible to rise above." "I'm dealing with a Doug right now," another message read. "Your post reminded me that I'm not the problem, he is." I realized my story had become bigger than just my personal experience. It was a rallying cry for anyone who'd been bullied, underestimated, or told they weren't good enough. The response was overwhelming and deeply moving. I'd found my voice, and apparently, it resonated with a lot of people. 2 years later, I'm thriving at Apex Construction. I've been promoted twice and am now training new hires, something I do with patience and kindness, remembering how it felt to be dismissed and ignored. "You're a natural teacher," Robert told me recently. "Have you considered pursuing a supervisor role?" The question would have terrified me during my Doug days. Now, it excited me. "I'd love to explore that opportunity." "We're considering you for the next opening," he said. "You've earned it." My kids are proud of their mom's success. They brag to their friends about how I build things and fix problems. I've become the role model I always wanted to be for them. I still see Doug occasionally at industry events. He looks smaller somehow, diminished by the consequences of his actions. He avoids eye contact and usually leaves early. I feel no satisfaction in his downfall anymore. I'm too busy building my own success to dwell on his failures. The angry, broken woman who once cried in her car outside the daycare is gone. In her place is someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand up for herself. When Doug called me worthless that day, I almost believed him. I sat in my car wondering if I really was a failure, if I deserved the treatment I was receiving. But instead of breaking, I decided to prove him wrong. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through quiet persistence and steady growth. I documented everything, built alliances with decent people, and refused to let his toxicity define my worth. When the opportunity came to leave, I took it. When he tried to sabotage my new start, I let his reputation speak for itself. The revenge wasn't explosive or immediate. It was patient and methodical. I let Doug destroy himself while I built something better. Today, I walked onto a construction site as the lead supervisor for a major project. My crew respects me, my clients trust me, and my kids are proud of me. I thought about Doug's prediction that I'd never amount to anything in construction. I smiled as I adjusted my hard hat and picked up my clipboard. Turns out I wasn't worthless. I was just underestimated. And sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all.